200 men stand in the rain. 5 months from now, maybe 10 will still be here. The Special Air Service does not recruit from the street. If you want in, you are already serving somewhere else in the British Armed Forces. Maybe the Paras, maybe the Royal Marines, maybe some other unit with a serious reputation. None of that matters now. The moment you arrive in the Brecon Beacons, your old rank, your old pride, and your old identity stop meaning much. This is selection, and selection is designed to strip you down until the only thing left is refusal. It happens twice a year, winter and summer. Both can kill you. One freezes you slowly, the other cooks you under weight. You do not get to choose which version of misery tests whether you belong here. The first phase is the hills. 3 weeks in the Welsh mountains, alone carrying a burden that gets heavier as your body gets weaker. You move from checkpoint to checkpoint with a map, a rifle, and no encouragement. The directing staff do not motivate you. They do not coach you. They write down your number, hand you the next grid reference, and watch you disappear back into the weather. That silence matters, because the SAS is not testing whether you perform when people are shouting for you. It is testing whether you can keep moving when nobody cares how much pain you are in. Week 1 ends with the fan dance. 26 kilometres over Pen Y Fan with a time limit and enough weight to turn every incline into punishment. Up the west slope, down Jacob's Ladder, along the old Roman road, then back again. It is the kind of route designed by people who understand exactly how to attack the knees, lungs and mind at the same time. You think that must be the hard part. It is not. The real execution ground is the long drag. 64 kilometres, 20 hours, just you, your burden, your rifle and ground that seems personally committed to ruining human bodies. By kilometre 40, your feet are blistered open, your shoulders are numb and your legs no longer feel like they belong to you. There is no team around you, no one carries your load, no one tells you to dig deep. You either keep hitting checkpoints or you disappear from the course. That is where the numbers collapse. Former SAS men have described selection classes dropping from more than 200 candidates to barely 24 by the end of the hills. And even then, those survivors have not earned the regiment. They have only earned the right to keep suffering. That brings you to continuation training at Stirling Lines. This is where the SAS stops asking whether you are hard enough and starts asking whether you are useful enough. You learn weapons first. Not just British kit, everything. Russian, Chinese, American. If allies use it, you learn it. If enemies use it, you learn that too. Because in the real world, you do not get to tell the mission to wait while you figure out the controls. Then patrolling, ambushes, break contact drills, demolitions, reconnaissance, combat casualty care. Driving that has nothing to do with roads or traffic laws. Close quarters battle until the body responds faster than thought. The standard is not good. The standard is that when the moment comes, you do the right thing under pressure without needing to think yourself into it. If you fail to absorb that, you go back to your unit. No speech, no second chance, just gone. Then comes the jungle, Belize, Brunei. Deep green terrain where everything is wet, infected, venomous, or hidden. You move in 4-man patrols through a world that rots discipline 1 hour at a time. Your skin never dries, your kit never dries, your feet soften, your cuts get worse. Your weapon has to stay clean in an environment determined to choke it with mud. The jungle does not break men with one dramatic event. It does it through accumulation. Sleeplessness, heat, rot, isolation, hunger, bugs crawling into places that should remain private. The constant feeling that if you let your standards slip for even a day, the environment will punish you for it. That is why some candidates survive the mountains and fail here. The hills are pain. The jungle is decay. And the SAS needs men who can hold discipline inside both. Then, just when your body is already burning through itself, comes the phase that matters most psychologically: escape and evasion. You are given minimal instructions, turned loose in the countryside, and hunted. You move cold, tired, underfed, and aware that the people tracking you know the ground better than you do. Maybe you reach your waypoints, maybe you get caught early. It almost does not matter, because the real test starts afterward. Tactical questioning. This is where the course stops pretending it is about endurance and starts asking what happens when endurance is no longer enough. You are isolated, exhausted, disoriented, and interrogated by professionals whose entire job is to make you doubt your memory, your teammates, your mission, and yourself. Stress positions, noise, light, darkness, time distortion, relief offered in exchange for one simple answer. Just one. That is the point. The SAS does not need men who feel no fear. It needs men who can hold out while fear, pain, fatigue, and confusion all start working together against them. Intelligence expires, plans change, teams move. If you can resist long enough, the information inside your head becomes less useful. If you cannot, other people pay for it. Some men make it through the hills and the jungle only to break here. That is not weakness. This phase is designed to locate the exact point where the mind starts bargaining with suffering. The few who survive it come out looking less like victors than wreckage, and then they are handed the beige beret. This is the moment outsiders think the story ends. It does not, because earning the beret does not make you a finished SAS soldier. It makes you a probationary one. You still have to prove you can function inside the regiment itself, where the standards do not become easier. They become more precise. Now you enter the next rung. Level 1. The new trooper. You are assigned to a Sabre squadron, A, B, D, or G. Inside that squadron are troops built around insertion and terrain specialties: air, boat, mobility, mountain. You do not choose where you go. The regiment places you where it needs you, and then it watches. That first year is not about glory. It is about acceptance. The men around you have already been there. They know what a fraud looks like. They know the difference between someone who survives selection and someone who belongs after it. So you train shooting, demolitions, movement, medical work, parachuting, counter-terror drills, repetition without end, because readiness is not a mood in the SAS. It is maintenance. This is also where the myth meets the standard. The regiment's hostage rescue legacy was burned into public memory during the Iranian embassy siege. Black-clad operators moving through windows under live world pressure in front of cameras. What the public saw as precision in a single moment was actually the result of endless controlled violence in training long before that day ever came. And nowhere is that clearer than the killing house. At Hereford, room entries are practiced until they become reflex. Doors breached, stun grenades thrown, corners cleared, targets engaged. Then the difficulty gets uglier. Live ammunition, teammates acting as hostages, real rounds passing close enough that one mistake would destroy more than a mission. That is the standard. Not can you shoot well, can you shoot perfectly inside chaos next to your own people with no room for being almost right. If you can, you stop being the new man. You become deployable. Level 2. Operational trooper. Now the regiment uses you. The mission could be direct action, a night raid against a high-value target. In by helicopter, breach fast, secure the objective, out before the whole area understands what happened. It could be reconnaissance, days in a hide, watching, counting, mapping routines, building the intelligence picture that determines whether someone else will raid, strike, or stand down. It could be training foreign partner forces, it could be surveillance, it could be a job in a country your government has no interest in discussing publicly. That is part of the reality too. Some missions stay classified, some deployments remain deniable. If things go wrong, the public version of events may be built for politics, not truth. You accept that when you stay in this world. And over time, the cost becomes more personal. Multiple deployments, repeated separations, teammates lost in crashes, blasts, firefights, or the random cruelty that follows soldiers into enough hostile places. The SAS may take fewer casualties than most, but fewer is not the same as none. Every dead man leaves behind a shape the squadron feels afterward. This is the rung where the fantasy dies for good. Because by now, the work is no longer about becoming elite. You already crossed that line. Now it is about doing classified violence and precision work inside ambiguity over and over until your body, mind, or luck starts to run out. Some men rise into patrol leadership. Some move toward training, planning, or specialist surveillance work. Some stay operational as long as they can because they would rather keep doing the job than become administrators of it. That is one of the truths of the SAS ladder. Rank matters. Competence matters more. Level 3. The end of the line. Eventually, the body sends its bill. A bad landing, accumulated damage, knees worn down by years under load, shoulders that never fully recovered, a back that stiffens one morning and never really forgives you. Special operations always looks immortal from the outside. It is not. It is rented violence performed on borrowed time. So you leave the regiment. Some men go into private security. Some consult, some train others, some vanish into civilian life carrying a set of skills normal life has very little use for. But what stays constant is the silence. You do not get to tell most of the stories. The operations remain classified. The details remain sealed. The most formative years of your life become a vague section on a resume and a collection of memories you cannot explain properly to people who were not there. That is the final price of the ladder. Not just pain, not just danger, erasure. The beige beret ends up in a drawer, the winged dagger in a box. Not because they mean nothing, but because they mean too much to display casually. They belong to a part of your life that shaped everything and can still be spoken about only in fragments. And somewhere in Wales, another 200 men are standing in the rain. Most of them will fail in the hills. Some will fail in the jungle. Some will fail in the interrogation room. A few will walk out wearing the beret, and even then they will only be at the beginning. Because that is what the SAS power ladder really is. Not a glamorous path upward, a narrowing filter, a machine built to find men who will keep functioning after pain, isolation, exhaustion, and fear have stripped almost everything else away. Most break. The few who do not become the soldiers governments use in the space between official war and official denial.